Have you ever felt like you are absolutely drowning in all of the language learning tips and strategies and organizational methods that are floating around YouTube? And what do these all have in common, actually? They all focus on discipline being the thing that will get you fluent one day. And when learning languages myself, whether that be my very first foreign language or my fifth, I had the same narrative. So I thought that I had to stay disciplined and show that through being consistent and showing up every single day, no matter how I was feeling. And around my fifth language, that is when I started to feel extremely stuck. Feeling that I was just battling myself day to day, feeling like language learning was starting to feel like a chore, and not finding joy and presence in the language learning process itself. That wasn't a really good remedy for keeping on with language learning. And when I truly learned to lean into my vulnerability, not my discipline as a language learner, that is when I finally got to get unstuck. That is what actually helped me realize, hey, this is actually a superpower for language learning that is not talked about, and that has helped me find long-term fulfillment, long-term joy in the process, and also long-term success in really any language goal that I have wanted to accomplish up until this point. And I want to share that with you in this video today, for how working with instead of against your own vulnerability as a language learner is an absolute superpower and not something that you should be afraid will hinder you in your progress. So learning a language is, of course, inherently very vulnerable. And even more so as an adult than as a child learning their language, right? Because not only are we thinking about what we think about ourselves, we're also thinking about what others could be thinking about us. And I'm sure we get a lot of internalized messages from the kind of marketing that language learning companies and language learning YouTubers, yes, even myself, use in order to get our attention and pull us into a video. There's also tons of risk. There is tons of uncertainty. Just putting yourself out there, knowing what little or however much you know in a new language. Maybe you don't understand everything. Maybe you're going to say things wrong. In fact, it's a given that we're going to say things wrong. Vulnerability can show up for us in any of these ways, plus many, many more. And it might show up differently for you. But the common denominator of all these experiences is that when you don't accept your vulnerability, that is when you get mentally blocked and mentally stuck, right? When you put up resistance to being vulnerable. And our own resistance against being a vulnerable human being is perhaps over-relying on translators so that you don't feel like you have to so spontaneously speak. Maybe your resistance to vulnerability comes when you don't ask for help in a language. Maybe you think, hey, I can do all of the solo language study by myself and I don't need anyone else to direct me to different resources. I can do, whatever I want to and need to. I can find whatever I want to and need to independently. And this is also something that plagued me as well as a language learner. I should have been a lot more vulnerable and just simply asked for help because it was right there when I needed it. It would have sped up my progress drastically, and I didn't reach out and take it. Maybe a resistance to vulnerability just looks like you avoiding what you know is good for you and your learning. For example, you want to get fluent, but you avoid speaking at every turn, really, because you know that that's going to put you already in a vulnerable position. How we as humans build meaning throughout our lives is processing the journey up to wherever we want to go, right? And really showing up, being present, feeling fulfilled in what we're doing, feeling fulfilled even as we show up, every day and we give that commitment to ourselves, right? Study, organize in this language however we feel is right for our goals. And if we keep on resisting, we're not going to be able to be even present enough in our own language learning in order to build that kind of meaning. And that's usually when we can feel kind of hollow as language learners, even after maybe we have a few language wins and celebrations, right? We didn't actually process entirely what the journey meant for us in our lives, and therefore it can very much lead to losing motivation, losing that really big quote unquote discipline that we think is the key to learning. When we resist vulnerability instead of just accept it as part of that journey that is helping us build meaning within our own lives, we start seeing mistakes. We start seeing having insecurities, feeling uncomfortable as being failures or as being obstacles on our language journey. When actually, as I said before, they are all requirements in order to get fluent and reach our language goals. It is vulnerability. and accepting the role that vulnerability plays in your language journey that you are missing as a language learner. That helps you be a better language learner overall. And when I truly embraced being vulnerable, my curiosity became endless. I thought about limiting myself to just one language at a time, right? I told myself I had to be disciplined and get to a C1 level with every single language that I touched before moving on to the next one. I never allowed myself to dabble. And once I really tuned into vulnerability, I discovered that my actual true yearning for what I wanted to accomplish in my languages and my reason for learning languages in the first place was to really just explore the world. And that doesn't mean, for me, reaching a C1 and maintaining it in every single language. In fact, I started to trick myself into thinking that that was discipline when really it was more or less a strategy for me to continue to self-harm and continue to talk down to myself whenever I didn't meet my own standards that weren't based on my values of curiosity anyways, you know what I mean? So I was coming a lot from a place of lack, just thinking about what I didn't have on my language journey, how much I didn't know. And when I started to approach from a place of vulnerability, my curiosity for just being inspired by just learning more, right, fueled my language journey to infinity, right? Curiosity is it doesn't have a limit. And I think that that is a beautiful byproduct of being vulnerable and accepting that vulnerability within yourself, right? We can't be perfect. I had to sit down with myself and say, it's a very unhuman expectation to expect that I can maintain a C1 to a C2 in every single language at every single day, at every single moment of my language journey, because I come and show up with different energy in my language learning every time. And it's unfair for me to keep on thinking that discipline, quote unquote, is going to help me to achieve all my goals. No, it was recognizing that actually I had limits that really helped me understand, okay, like you can start learning in your own way. And if that means learning outside of what you deem as a C1 and starting to dabble in languages, if that makes you feel more human and makes you feel more curious about the world, then so be it. That's actually what works better for you. And you don't need that C1 every single time. That was a huge mindset shift, you guys, that I saw play out and that I saw really propel me through learning multiple languages. Not only do you have the curiosity, you also have the courage to be a beginner over and over again. Yes, it is a very humbling experience to learn a language, maybe to fluency, and then you start with another one and you're right back with where you started, right? But it is such an important part of the process to embrace that vulnerability and embrace looking at the world from just as an innocent observer who hasn't learned anything about the language yet, and really look at it as a place of, I can accept, right, that I am vulnerable in this moment, but that really allows me the opportunity to grow into my language however I want at my own pace. And it's such a gift. And when you start to accept more vulnerability into your language journey, that is also when you start to understand how you personally learn best. I know that it is sometimes complicated to think about, how do I learn best? I don't really know that about myself. But sometimes we keep on not wanting to be vulnerable, not wanting to put ourselves in certain situations where we know, okay, people are going to see that, I'm going to make a mistake, or I'm going to say something wrong, or I'm going to sound like a 2-year-old, right? We keep on avoiding the situations where we can see how our strengths will inevitably play out in real time when we are speaking spontaneously, when we are being vulnerable, when we can't prep ourselves beforehand, with a translator or being all up in our heads about, what are we going to plan to say to this native speaker, right? In this really vulnerable speaking situation, when we don't allow ourselves to at least give ourselves the opportunity to prove to ourselves that we can actually do something hard and vulnerable, we really still the opportunity to understand how we learn best, right? Because with every single vulnerable, valuable interaction, we are gathering data about ourselves, about us as a language learner. And again, if we never give ourselves the opportunity, then that is going to be a huge detriment on our long-term learning success. The majority of people in the world want to actually see us succeed. So give the other person that opportunity to prove your own fears wrong as well. Language learning, of course, is not a competitive performance by any means. It is also human. It is also inherently imperfect and a tool that we use for communication with others. And if we harness that vulnerability correctly, we can learn to really deeply connect with other people, but also more deeply connect with ourselves inside of a more fulfilling, meaningful language learning journey. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this more deep topic on language learning. Let me know if you would like to hear more chats about similar topics in the future, and I'll see you in my next video soon.